Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our educational webinar series on Recruiting Daily. I am Alexis Gingerella, your hostess with the mostest, and I am here today with George LaRock to talk about what is working in tech recruiting right now. So, per usual, let's talk a couple housekeeping items. Your control panel that is on your screen there or on your phone, you're in listen only mode, meaning you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. So what we're going to do is encourage you, as always, to utilize that control panel to please raise your hand, ask questions, or include your own tips and tricks that you maybe want other people to learn about as well. If you're not into raising your hand and asking questions on GoToWebinar, follow along on Twitter using the hashtag #RDaily, because we will be following along there if you want to post questions on social media. Part of today's agenda, we're going to go over some trends that are impacting recruiting. We're going to go over tech buying trends, hashtag HR tech stack. I know most of you have heard that term before. And we're going to bring it all together and show you some examples of what's working. So I'm going to throw it over to today's expert, whose last name is LaRock and not LaRocque like I thought, because I really wanted to make him sound fancy. So I am going to pass it over to my pal George, who's going to talk a little bit about himself and what he does. And we're just going to jump right into some of the expertise. So George, take it away.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you so much for that. And thanks for having me here today. So I am George LaRock. I'm a market analyst and the founder of HR Wins. To being a market analyst, what that means is I do a couple of things. I work with employers, I work with technology vendors, I do a lot of research into what's happening in the market, what people are buying, what people are using. I facilitate a lot of deep dives with HR and recruiting leaders about what their plans are, what's working today, and then I translate that for the vendors, and I translate what the vendors are saying for the practitioners. I sort of view what I'm doing as being on a quest for truth and sort of cutting through the hype. But I do like to step back and look at sort of why are we doing what we're doing today? What are the trends that are driving it in the market? What are the trends that are driving us in the industry? And then really get into the reality of what's working today and how that's all coming together. My background, why I'm here or why do you want to listen to me talk about this? For 10 years, I was on the practitioner side. I came out of recruiting and staffing, moved on to the employer side, moved into talent management and HR, spent 10 years then on the vendor side, launched a couple of big brands in the space, and then I've been doing this work for about 9 years. So I've done nothing but lived and breathed recruiting and HR technology for longer than I usually care to admit. So that being said, let's dive right into it. So, the big, sort of high level trends that are sort of creating the challenges that we're all dealing with. It really starts with the fact that we've got this perfect storm, right? We've got, 50% of employers are increasing their headcount this year. That's against record, low global unemployment. So it's low or the lowest it's ever been just about everywhere in the world right now. And what we used to talk about as a skills gap is now just a complete skills shortage. So the stats, 75% of employers say that it's a shortage that they're up against. They just can't find the skills. And if you think about how quickly especially in tech recruiting, how quickly things change. We're talking about things today like machine learning and AI and, data scientists. If we think back just, 5 years ago, it was unique to be recruiting for those. And now these are, embedded in a lot of job descriptions and a lot of the commercial products that are shipping. So those two stats come from the Hayes study that came out in the last year or so. And what does this result in? It results in jobs, so this is where it really hits home for recruiters and talent acquisition leaders. jobs are just filled at a much slower rate than they've ever been. Forbes this year said they're filled at the slowest rate that they have been in the last 3 years. And so how slow was it 3 years ago? Well, Deloitte had said that it had slipped from 2010 to 2015 from 19 days on an average time to hire to 52 days. And now, I don't have a stat. I can't find a stat on the average time to fill, but it's even worse based on, everything that we're seeing and experiencing out there. Now, along with that, there's an increased pressure on two things here. One is making better informed hiring decisions. So there's a lot of pressure on you as recruiters or recruiting leaders to support not just yourselves, but the hiring teams in making better decisions, assessing candidates more thoroughly, whether you're focused on skills or air quotes fit or culture, or whatever your environment is focused on. There's a lot of pressure to have data be informing these decisions, and at the same time, a big part of what the society is talking about right now is making more fair hiring decisions. So this is where diversity and inclusion is a big part of what everybody's talking about now. So those are sort of the high level trends. Now, what are we talking about? So in the research that I do and in talking to employers, the things that are coming up, as much as I'm already tired of talking about automation of jobs and AI, and we're really just at the beginning of this. But it's something that 50% of the employers that I talk to say that this will have a significant impact on their business in the next few years, and over 50% talk about just technical disruption, right? Their businesses are being disrupted, and what this all really, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, what this really results in is this uncertainty, in the future, as to where will we be going with automation, and I'm not just talking about the recruiter role or how we automate process. That's certainly a big part of the dialogue in our world. I'm talking about overall within your businesses. What's being disrupted at a high level, a strategic level, a tactical level, and how are things being automated? How is technology having an impact? Diversity and inclusion. 78% of employers in the LinkedIn their big study, it's the Global Hiring Trends study for 2018, 78% said that diversity and inclusion was very or extremely important. And along with that, 56% said that new interviewing tools, new ways to assess candidates were extremely important. Now, directly, coming out of my work, this is for the last 3 years, so studies from 2016, 2017, 2018, and all of my work with employers. One of the big talks when we look at technology and how we can leverage technology is around consumerization and experience. And this relates not just to the technology, but to how we approach recruiting, and we'll get into some examples when we pull this all together, but also access and usability. So whether you're a candidate or a recruiter, if you're interacting with a brand, it's generally via some sort of technology, whether it's initially via a website, looking at email, looking at a message via text, etc. And usability is the number one reason people are changing technology so frequently. And as I said, this has come out persistently for the last 3 years as big issues. So now, what are we buying? As that's sort of the backdrop, and I'm moving along a little quickly, and I know we'll take questions at the end or along the way. So feel free to ask me to go back and revisit any of this. But what I put here are the top 4 in the most recent work that I've done through the HR open source, the HR wins, and a few other studies that I have going right now, asking what, and this is consistent across the board, recruitment marketing, including CRM, diversity and inclusion, 39% of the market is expecting to invest in technology to help reduce bias in the hiring process. And in all that, the entire process, whether it's how you're sourcing or what tools you're using to source, or what you're using to interact with candidates, how you're presenting your jobs, also how you're interviewing and how your selection process and how you're working with your interviewing teams. Talent pool development is another area that is something that it's been a lot of discussion for a lot of years, but it's an area where, because of those skills shortages, there's a real focus on developing external and internal pools of talent for the jobs that are coming up. And so how do we engage with that talent? How do we convert that talent into, if it's externally, into a candidate or into an applicant, et cetera? And again, because it's so hard to find people, job ad technology across the board, whether it's programmatic, whether it's just pure job distribution, or whether it's job boards and new approaches to going after talent, finding and engaging talent. It's an area where there's a lot of investment, both by the buyers and investors. So you can see how all of these line up against some of those trends that we're talking about, but these are just the top four. Across every category in recruiting technology, overall, it's between 30 and 40% of the market will churn, and meaning they will either implement new or replace existing recruiting technology, recruiting software. And that's whether it's that is also through my work over the last 3. It's been very consistent, ranging 30 to 40%. So as an analyst, you can always count on the high level. We're up at the high level talking about why and what people are buying, and there's a lot of stats. But let's dig into what's working. And these are some specific examples of where, with these trends in mind, where some employers have applied process, strategy, tactics, and technology to have some level of success. And I really need to stress up front that you've got to first prioritize your approach and your strategy, how you're going to the market. If you're an individual recruiter, or if you're a recruiting or talent acquisition leader, prioritize your approach and strategy and the tactics that you're going to use over the technology. Don't start with the technology. There are so many options for technology. There's an ongoing sort of proliferation of point solutions and platforms that address all aspects of the recruiting approach, from sourcing to engagement and nurturing and hiring and onboarding. If you're focused on what the technology can do, you'll be chasing your tail. You've got to start with identifying your gaps in your organization. Is it in your approach? Is it in your people? Is it in their skills? Is it in the technology that you're using, or is it all of the above? And then prioritize those and go after those in a systemic approach, because it's not one size fits all. What works for the companies that I'm about to talk to you about may or may not work for you, or it may be a nugget of something that works here for you. So let's drill into it with that as the backdrop. I'm not prescribing, I'm sharing. So first example is CDW. They're a big global company. You may have bought from them on the B2B side. It's hardware, software, and services, all focused on technology. It's a global brand. They have or had a great infrastructure and team, but it was the the situation there was one, what was happening was they needed to move their approach, their sourcing and recruiting, to be more modern, to support more modern approaches to drive more conversions. So they were really focused on how do we convert more candidates, and what they focused on were 4 key areas: their career site, their application or apply workflow, application workflow, their sourcing and CRM. So what they were using in their sourcing and direct recruiting efforts, as well as job distribution. So how they did it, we're a couple slides if you want to move forward 1 or 2 slides. So how they went after it, and starting with and I just have these in no particular order, but on the career site, starting with the rebrand and targeted messaging tailored to their audiences being both driven by the jobs that they were trying to fill, as well as literally the audiences they were communicating to or going after. And this applies to the career site, as well as you'll hear me talk about this in other areas and in other examples. But rule number 1 in any sort of marketing, whether it's business to consumer or business to business, is to define and know your audience. So if I'm recruiting students or veterans or highly skilled, hard to find workers or alumni, or if I'm recruiting for certain job types, this all comes together and impacts what my message should be, and how and when and what the tailored message should be to each of those audiences. That is more about your approach and your tactics and your strategy to engage and convert, to speak directly to the talent that's available in the market, whether it's external or internal, more so than it is about the technology. The technology needs to be able to support that. The next big area, and where you'll see they had some great results, was in their apply workflow. So when you think about applications, it needs to be, we talked about how access and usability is a big problem with recruiting technology and HR technology classically, and it's still one of the top reasons that it gets switched out. It almost sounds gratuitous now to say it needs to be mobile, but it does. It's surprising how much of the technology I see struggles, on a smartphone or on a tablet. It's not responsive. It needs to be mobile. It needs to work well there. It needs to be fast, and it needs to leverage existing data to provide a better experience. So thinking about that application workflow and those audiences. If you've got internal candidates and you're thinking about mobility, a lot about them. Don't ask them a lot of questions about information that you already know. And I would say the same thing about the audiences externally. So you're nurturing candidates that first applied to your company 12 months ago. Something about them. You may have information that needs to be updated. You may have a profile that needs to be reflect their more current experience, but especially when you get into that apply logic, you're at the end of that, and that first part of the journey with a candidate or potentially a new hire. That experience and what you make them go through in the application can have a big, there's a big drop off, and we'll talk about what those averages are and what happened here in a few seconds. The sourcing and CRM technology, they implemented a flexible approach to talent pools. So it's not about just joining the talent pool. Somebody may apply, somebody may not join the talent pool, somebody may provide information, but it's not about a railroad track that's one direction. It's about having the flexibility to accommodate the candidate and get them into the process or into the database so that you can start to nurture them via whether it's email or text or other whatever campaigns you're doing and you're executing, and that it's data driven. And that was a big part of what was behind the approach here. And then, job distribution, at the end of the day, you've got to get the job out there, and it's got to be intelligent, and it's got to be driven by data. It's got to be driven by what we know about those audiences, where they are, where we're having success, the budget that we have, et cetera. So intelligent and data-driven job distribution. Whether you're getting into some of the more, modern programmatic approaches where the system is making decisions for you, or whether you're doing straight on job distribution, those are the things to think about. So the results here, and these folks, by the way, I believe I'm not sure if they replaced their ATS or not, but I know what they put on top of their ATS was telemetry. Telemetry's recruitment, marketing, and CRM capabilities in this example. And the time on the career site based on that messaging and the rebranding, which again, all happens outside of the technology, but the technology enables it and gives that more tailored experience. Time on career site nearly doubled to about 6 minutes per visit. Which is huge. That's a big improvement. And if you've got a visitor to your career site spending 6 minutes, you can see that in your analytics before they're moving on or moving off of the career site. They're engaging with your brand, engaging with the jobs, learning more about you, and you're more likely to convert them. On the CRM and sourcing side, their open rates based on that messaging and the approach that they're taking there. They had on some campaigns up to 72% open rates on these campaigns, which is huge for an email campaign. General B2B and B2C marketers would be salivating over that kind of open rate. And what that means is that they're communicating to the right candidates with the right message at the right time. And they're catching the attention of the recipient with a good subject line and getting an open based on relevance, right? So this is the big one. Their application conversion rate was 83%, improved to 83%, which I believe is at the top end of the market. And by application conversion rate, it means that only 17% of the applications that were the candidates who started the application dropped off. We're used to seeing factors of candidates of those numbers dropping out of the process. So I'm specifically talking about the approaches here because, again, one of the things that I'm stressing in my work is that you've got to prioritize the approach and think about the audience and build your strategy and your process to that audience, and then build the technology to support that. So the next example that I give you is a little more brief. There's a company called Schneider Electric. They're another big global firm. They're in energy management and automation. They provide hardware, software, and services. I think most businesses these days are considered they're morphing into technology businesses. They had a really specific challenge, which was, as a global business, as they are working in China, their global recruiting infrastructure, at least that's what I'm aware of, was blocked by what we refer to as the Great Firewall of China. So it's a different environment there, and in country in China, especially where most of this technology is in the cloud these days, candidates and employers there can't just access all of the technology that they can here, right? So it's that's generally understood. They've got different sort of privacy and trade laws there. So they needed to streamline local solutions to fuel hiring with their sort of ATS on the back end, which was accessed globally. So their approach there, if you can move to the next slide, one more. They focused, whoops, that's okay. They focused on 6 key positions, and they did a really deep dive into the personas for each of these positions. And that dive that they did went deep into both interviewing their existing employees as well as doing research with external candidates, and the sort of the research with consumers at large, to then fuel what was we'll call it AI flavored technology that drove a big part of the assessment and interview for these candidates. So this is something that is very cutting edge in the sense that it's taking over it's automating a big part of the assessment and interview process. This is a lot of the debate in the market that we're having in the US and elsewhere about candidate interaction with chatbots and different types of automated interview technology, and then automated assessments. It gets into ethics and so forth, but this is a process that worked really well, and is in fact my friends at HireClicks, who managed and consulted on most of the implementation here, as well as the audience work, tells me that it's being extended globally. So this is I wanted to bring in an example that is sort of fresh and new, fresh just being the timeliness of when it's been implemented, but that address some of the newer chatbot and sort of recruiting automation, since that's one of the big conversations that we're having, and it's something that I think, again, that where they started was with the 6 key positions, identifying the personas around those positions, and really developing a deep understanding of that audience and those positions, and then building an experience for those key positions. Only those individuals vying for those positions opt into this workflow, and so it's extremely tailored. And the reason I say AI flavored is it's highly programmed. Most of the AI that we see in the market today has rails around it as far as the a menu-driven sort of conversation, while it develops sort of the learning to really automate that or be more independent. So that being said, I want to shift gears into diversity and inclusion, another topic that we noticed as a big trend. So a lot of what I hear and see around diversity and inclusion in the marketplace is focused on targeting a talent pool, which I think going to where there are more diverse candidates to then include them in your process is sort of before step one. It should be an afterthought in your approach to recruiting, and extending the list of where you're recruiting, right? So we've all got stories of employers who are recruiting from a small number of schools if it's entry level, or a small number of sources in general, or being very limited in their approach to the market. So I think that's number one. But a lot of what I'm seeing is based on tools that are doing things like blinding bits on the resume, and that if done correctly, it can have an impact. But what really changes, for an employer or for anyone, as humans. This is really about a change in behavior. So in this case, the example I want to talk to you about is in changing the behavior of the recruiting and the interviewing team. And what that means is, minimizing the opportunity for recruiters, anybody involved in the process, minimize the opportunity for unconscious bias. We all come to the process with some level of bias. It's not all a bad thing, but it's a slippery slope. We want to make the hiring decision more objective, and then we want to measure and improve on what that experience is. And the example that I have to talk to you about, I know that Pinterest is leveraging their technology platform to do just that. The platform that they're leveraging is Greenhouse. And so how is this getting done? We talked about, blinding different bits of the interview, of the resume, and managing. I think the way to think about this isn't about blinding resumes, but it's about focusing candidate data that you're sharing with the interview team, focusing it on critical attributes and highlights. So I would never take the guidance of a tech vendor as to what I should be, and I'm no diversity and inclusion expert either, but I would, work with a consultant or someone on the HR team, if you're big enough to have someone who has expertise in this area, and work with a tool that gives you the flexibility to blind, not consistently throughout the entire process potentially, but to sort of turn on and off what's visible to folks involved in the recruiting process based on the point in the process where you are. So when we're looking at resumes, what's visible may be different than when we're interviewing. We may need access to more information in order to prepare for an effective interview, as one example. The other thing when we get into really changing behavior, what I mean by that is, many of us have been through diversity training. Many of us are given information that may help us, apply less bias into how we're looking at the data or the information in hiring or in recruiting, making recruiting decisions. But we have this great opportunity as we're managing the hiring workflow to change the behavior of the team by reminding them to focus on efforts that promote more inclusion. So when they're reviewing a resume, we may provide information and sort of nudge them or prompt them to focus on, skills or focus on results. When they're in an interview, it may not just be about the interview guide and the questions that they ask, but when they're providing feedback, it may be about asking for more information about why the feedback, why the rating on a particular skill, etc., may be at a certain level, to provide more context and be more objective and get more objective results. And then, of course, measuring and improving. Analytics are key to this process, and looking at those hiring decisions and how they've been made with in-application analytics, and moving the process forward and improving it based on those results. Some other things that those analytics do is they help for more consistent standards throughout the process, and other bits of I think, a big area that is being invested in, and a lot of folks are exploring, are assessments. As we're assessing, especially for skills, having the ability to provide, the assessment and look at the assessment results in a more anonymous fashion, helps reduce bias in the process as well. So that's an example that addresses the diversity and inclusion issue, and where both a combination of approach and technology has contributed to that. We're moving on to the next one. We're a slide behind. So I want you to humor me for this last example. It's a company called the Hair Cuttery, and this is not a tech shop, but it's an example. Sort of brings home some of the focus that we're talking about, and I would argue that at a high level, this process applies across any skill set. This is a company that has 900 salons and 12,000 associates across the country, and so they had a big challenge, which was in their industry. Most of the individuals that work in salons that cut hair, that style hair, are self-employed, but the Hair Cuttery employs them. They've got 12,000 associates, not contractors. So sort of like the opposite to the contingent workforce challenge. So in engaging with this type of talent and convincing them to sign on as a full-time employee, which is a change to the way it normally works in the market, how did they go about addressing it? Well, it came back again to personalization. And when I'm talking about getting to know your audiences and I'm talking about personalization, this is where, the big buzzword in the industry for a few years, rightly so, has been candidate experience. The big buzzword outside of recruiting in any sort of engaging with any sort of consumer or business to business marketing is customer experience, and it's personalization. So they had to look at personalization on their site, through all of their messaging, and through their campaigns. So the other thing that they had done was automated. So they've got a big national campaign, the ability to automate workflows and campaigns, and from a sourcing perspective in the CRM to nurture talent, and develop this database of individuals was really key. And having a CRM that really addresses talent, and then being able to market on a ongoing basis to the market at large, and integrating that marketing into local events. Because it's hiring is very local, as we all know, especially when you're in an environment like this. And the technology that they implemented in this case was Great People. And what they ended up, from a results perspective, gathering was, this is pretty impressive, a 50% increase in leads that were generated from lead to hire. And that's, again, the very earliest part of I hate the funnel analogy, but earliest part of the funnel, from lead to hire, an overall conversion of 3%, which is, from a marketing perspective, an incredible conversion rate. And most importantly, thinking about, maybe not most importantly, but equally important, that automation and having these processes running based on behaviors of the candidates and data that's provided about the candidates. Recruiters were given more time to then focus on what they're really there for, which is to make hires, engage with candidates, engage with hiring managers, branch managers, store managers, and get the job done. So I hope that fit the bill. I wanted to not just talk about what's happening at a high level, at a trend level, but really get into 3 or 4 examples of how folks had changed their approach or revisited their approach to drive results, and then applied technology to support that, that change or that direction.
That's awesome. And I do want to let everybody know that George just mentioned the company Great People. And if you are trying to locate them, it's actually GR and the number 8 people, because I made that mistake a bunch, but they're actually an awesome company. So please check them out. We do have some questions. So somebody wants to know, circling back to when we were talking, when you were talking about CDW,
Yeah.
anything you can tell us about their average application time?
Um, I'm actually looking at some stats right now. So I thought I might have, I don't have a stat on their average application time. However, if you want to ping me, you can. I didn't give any of my socials. It's at GLarock, or if you go to hrwins.com, you'll find every way possible to reach me. If you want to ping me with that, I know that I have that stat, and I'm happy to follow through on it for you. What I do know is that it vastly improved, and I just don't have it at my fingertips.
No worries. I can get you that person's contact info so we can answer that for them.
Sure.
As far as, you had mentioned earlier, you used to be on the other side of things as a practitioner. What are some good questions that you think practitioners should be asking vendors these days?
That's a really good question. I'm going to answer that, but my first answer is before you ask any vendors questions, ask other practitioners questions. So I do a lot at the high level. I don't do vendor selection. I don't help you purchase a piece of software, but I help folks get an understanding of the landscape and who's doing what out there, who should be included in the process. And I spend a lot of time looking at their process, and the absolute best source of information about these technologies comes from your network. So it's, obviously you're here on Recruiting Daily. This is a place where people from the industry come to share information and perspective. I know you've also got local networks, and you're participating in social platforms. Go to your industry peers, and ask there first to get a sense of what they're doing and what technology is working. Now, the biggest piece of advice that I would give you from a vendor perspective is to directly answer the question is, if you're seriously evaluating technology, push for direct access to the product team and the service and support team. At the end of the day, you're going to see the demos, and you're going to select a product that probably solves anywhere from 70 to 90% of the business problem that you're focused on. But what's really going to make your implementation successful is the commitment to a roadmap by the product teams that looks like where you want to go with your hiring in the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, an understanding of how they view whatever the part of the process is that you're focused on, sourcing, marketing, engagement, etc. And then on the support team and implementation team, so much of your success, you're really selecting a partner more so than you're selecting a product in this day and age. I run the Talent Product Plays Facebook group with Martin Burns, and we've got a few thousand, a combination of seasoned practitioners as well as tech vendor types, and this is a recurring dialogue where so many of the products, it's hard to differentiate them as a buyer, as a customer, and that's because a lot of the features line up across the board, and you're looking for the product that fits in your environment, your culture, your approach. Again, one size doesn't fit all. That's going to come out through your demo process, but more than anything else, it's getting access to the teams that you're actually going to work with and understanding what's working for their customers and how they're going to work with you.
I love that. And you need to get some licensing on that. You're selecting a partner, not just a product. I really like that a lot. I wrote that down. I'm going to put it on a post-it note on my desk. I think that's wonderful. Okay, so another question. Where do you think recruiting tech budgets should be planning for 2019? What about that kind of forecast?
That's a really that's a difficult question to answer in a vacuum because, the budget for, I'll use the companies that I talked about today. The budget for hair cuttery versus, a global tech shop like CDW or Schneider would be, vastly different. There's a I'm at a loss to give, like, again, there's no one size fits all, but there's a lot of data out there, and if anybody wants to engage offline on a sort of in a specific area, there's a lot of data available about sort of acceptable ranges on a price per employee per month basis for a software tool, and then getting into more like media. There's a lot of available data on that as well.
Okay, so maybe we focus it more on, like, what do you think are the areas they should focus their spending on? Like, would it be AI, chat? What do you think?
Oh, I would, if I was in the enviable position of sort of having all my core stuff taken care of, and I had a budget and I wanted to really focus on the next stage, the first thing I would do is I would focus on internally on assessing the gaps that I have in my people. I would actually look internally to understand where my gaps are. From there, I think most of the market that I've seen presents itself, if I think about like a maturity model. Most of the market has a lot of technology. One of the biggest disservices that's been done to the market is they've sort of measured success by the amount of technology that's been implemented, and that's just backwards, right? So you should be measuring success based on actual recruiting success. How you're doing in the process of recruitment marketing, or the process of sourcing, and what kind of analytics what kind of metrics you're driving in those areas, and then bringing the technology behind that. But my hunch is most people end up looking at they've got the front end of the process pretty well nailed in a from a job distribution, advertising, sort of message distribution perspective, and what they need there are better analytics. So I'd think about analytics, not a tool necessarily, not to lay over those tools, but any apps that you're using, any point solutions that you're using today should have analytics that help you make your recruitment marketing platform, your recruiting platform, your core recruiting platform. They should all give you enough data to make better spend decisions on your go-to-market with your job ads. The next big gap that I see is really around engagement and development of I'll call it the talent pool, whether it's external or internal. And we've spent so much money on recruiting technology and an incredible amount of money over the years on so if you've been in business for more than 10 years, you've probably spent an amount of money you don't want to talk about in driving candidate flow and implementing technology to capture it. But what do you have to show for it? And that's where my ability to capture data, build a pool, and engage and nurture on an ongoing basis, that's probably the cliff where most employers fall off. And that's probably where I'd be thinking about my investments in that area. And everything else, frankly, is gravy in comparison. The reality is most employers are not as mature in their processes or their skills as the technology that they're thinking about implementing.
Awesome. And we've got one more we'll do to round out the hour here. Do you have any examples of best practices or maybe some favorite tech stacks for a high growth company?
Favorite tech stack? That's funny to me. How would I answer that? I would say in an emerging, like a startup high growth environment, there are, a number of tools. I don't like to do commercials. I gave you case studies and referenced a few vendors out there, but in the emerging area from a platform perspective, we hear a lot about Greenhouse. We hear a lot about Lever. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank. There's a company out of Florida that has come up that does a great job for small shops that really need to implement a lot of their own tech and sort of with open APIs. We hear those brands a lot at the sort of smaller, emerging level. As we get into, the real middle market, so if you've got more than 1,000 employees and you're a high growth environment, it starts to sound like, iCIMS and Greenhouse from a platform perspective. I hear smart recruiters now and then from a platform perspective. And most of the legacy systems are sort of taking the back seat to some of the newer recruiting platforms. From a point solution perspective, it would almost be unfair for me to, mention, like a recruitment marketing perspective. I would say we talked about telemetry today. We talked about Great People today. They're also a platform vendor in the more in the enterprise space, the large enterprise space versus the middle market. I would say, Smashfly is a brand that we hear about. Phenom People is one that we hear about, but those are all more for larger enterprises. There's a dearth of point solutions available, and it'd almost be unfair for me to talk about one and not the 30 others that have some level of traction.
Awesome. And for those people that might be wondering about some other tools that they can look at as far as adding to your tech stack, you can always head over to our website, recruitingtools.com, where there's a plethora of information on
there you go.
tools available. Look at that. I should have just said that and saved you some air.
There you go.
Well, what we're going to do, in the words of William Tincup, we're going to give everybody a couple minutes back into their schedule today, because that was a good 53 minutes of some awesome expertise from you, George. So I really appreciate you being with us today and going over all of this. And I'm going to make sure everyone that registered and was in attendance, make sure to get a copy of today's recording, as well as the slide deck. I'll fix that one slide that looks like we were missing some bullet points on the persona, so don't worry. And if there were any questions we didn't get to, I will make sure to reach out to George so he can personally answer those. And reach out and answer any other questions that anybody might have. So any final word before we close it out for the day, George?
No, just thanks for having me. Thanks to everybody who listened or watches this online. And, I hope to hear from many of you.
Awesome. Great. I'll get everything updated so everybody can have a copy of the recording and slides here probably within the next hour or so. So just stay tuned. And thanks again, George. And thank you for everyone that joined in. And we'll see you next week for another webinar. Have a great day.